Okay, Ron, you're all set.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for what has become a welcomed annual event. I am Ron Okram. I am the acting executive director of the New York State Gaming Commission. This is our third consecutive retired Racehorse Aftercare Summit, and I speak on behalf of the entire commission when I say we are proud to be with you all to discuss this important topic. I would like to recognize our Commissioner Peter Marchetti, who is graciously joining us today. Commissioner Marchetti, a horse owner, has espoused this issue and has been a proponent of the work we do at the Commission.
Thank you, Ron. Hello, everyone. This is my second term on the Commission. When I first started, my goal was to have some kind of influence with respect to horses. I'm a horse owner. They're not racehorses, they're jumpers. My girls rode when they were little. They somehow tricked my wife and I into buying them horses, and then they left for boys in college, and we were left with horses, so we learned to ride and jump. So I can appreciate all that goes into caring for a horse. And this year I retired my 26-year-old, so he is next door in a stall to my new horse. And I understand that even though his work is done, there's a lot of work to do for him. And I understand the cost and the effort. So I'm very sensitive to that. And when I came onto the commission, I was really pleased to see that the executive director, Rob Williams, and Lee Park were also very interested in that. And Jack Knowlton was the catalyst to get the Gaming Commission to start trying to have positive influence on aftercare as regulators, and that's what we are. We're regulators. We try to sit down and think, how can we help the industry, and how can we really help the horses with aftercare? And I know a lot of you are here. I know that it's a labor of love for most of you. It's an expensive venture. It's fallen on the shoulders of volunteers and charities. You have to pay for feed, for farriers, for vet, right, for overhead. All the costs that go into it, not including the tack and the equipment. And it's never ending, right? Maintenance is never ending. So we appreciate that, and I've met numerous times, been invited to meet with Lee and Rob and Jack, and we sit and we talk and we try to keep coming up with ideas how we can have a positive influence, and quite frankly, maybe, to be truthful, get some kind of flow of income, money to you guys to take some of the pressure off. So that's what we've been emphasizing. 2 weeks ago, the Gaming Commission got an award of recognition from the Old Friends at Cabin Creek, which I thought was nice. It really was for Rob Williams and the Commission, and they got that nice plaque that they gave us. But, we're a government entity, and we're regulators, and it was nice to be acknowledged, but there's a lot more to do, and we recognize that. So we try to have these seminars. We created the video. We try to put it in the forefront of people's mind, because during the season, racing is great and it's exciting, but people forget that at the end of the season, there are horses that are done. They're retired. And Lee has been trying to find out where they all go and what happens to them, and it has been a monumental task to find that out. It's been very difficult, and he's done very well with that. But that's one of the things we need to do before we can fully determine what the best way is to channel whatever we can to you folks, because we've got to figure out what the need is. So we've been doing that, and they've been working very hard. These guys have put a lot of time in, and that's kind of, I won't call it extracurricular, but it has to be put in with casinos and lottery and racing. But we want to try and keep it in the forefront. I want to thank Jack, too. He certainly is the catalyst. He's there all the time. It's certainly a labor of love for him. There's no real assignment for him to do that, but he comes and does it, and I'm sure it comes from the heart. So thank you, Jack, for that.
Thank you.
And of course, as Commissioner Marchetti noted, Jack Knowlton from Saratoga Stable, thank him for all the great work he's done in promoting aftercare and being an outstanding advocate on the issue to us. I know Rob Williams has said it before, but it bears repeating. If it wasn't for Jack, none of this would have happened. Jack.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, the third year. We're a little less formal this year, but it's great to see a lot of the same faces. My involvement began when now Senator Jim Tedisco, formerly Assemblyman Jim Tedisco, appointed me to the task force on retired racehorses. And we labored for 2 or 3 years and looked at a lot of information and talked to a lot of people, issued a report, and it had a lot of recommendations. And a couple of years, I guess about 3 years ago, I went to Rob Williams, who I'd worked with previously in a government capacity when I was on another assignment, and said, we did this report. I think it's really important, what's happened. And at that point, like a lot of government reports, it sat on a shelf and nothing had happened. And thankfully, Rob picked up the ball and assigned Lee to work on this issue. And I think we've come a long way. We all know that there's a long way that we have to go. But when I look back to the days when I was on the task force on retired racing, there was almost nothing that was going on. And certainly the issue was not in the forefront like it is today. We still have more work to do. I think the most frustrating issue that when I was on the task force that we had to address, and it still is out there, is financing the care and support for these retired racehorses. But I think in terms of the visibility, and one of the recommendations that the task force had was to make sure that owners, trainers, assistant trainers, when they got licensed, had to be aware of the issue of retirement and the aftercare of horses. And that's one of the big accomplishments I think that the commission has done, as now that is mandated for anybody who wants to get licensed in those categories. So we're moving forward. There are a lot of success stories, more work to do, and hopefully, the commission will continue the interest. I know Commissioner Machete has given a lot of his time to meetings, then with Rob and Lee and I, to try and move things forward. And I think that, the acting commissioner, by the fact that he's here, that is a good indication that we're going to be able to continue to move forward. And so thank you all for being here, and we'll hopefully have another session next year and have more successes to report.
Thank you. As many as you know, Rob Williams, who was the executive director for the commission since its inception in 2013, recently became Governor Cuomo's deputy secretary for gaming. He sends his deepest regrets for not being able to join us this year, but I can assure you that in his new elevated role, the issue of responsible racehorse retirement and aftercare, you have a tireless supporter in the Capitol, and we are grateful for his assistance and expertise. If we can now go around the table, everybody introduce themselves and a little bit about their organizations. Start this way.
Sure. My name's Leandra Cooper. I work as the New York facility manager and trainer. A little bit about New Vocations. We were founded in 1992, which brings us to our 25th anniversary. We've grown to be the largest ex-racehorse adoption program in the country. We take in about 450 horses a year. Our mission is to rehab, retrain, and rehome ex-racehorses, or retired racehorses rather. We, at any given time, are able to accommodate or have room for around 140 horses. That's across 4 states, 8 facilities, the states being Kentucky, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and most recently in 2016, in an effort to accommodate for NYTHA members, we just opened up both a rehabilitation and a rehoming/retraining facility in New York. So the central part of our mission really is the rehoming part. And as such, even though we take horses directly from the track and layout facilities, we really have a primary focus on horses who have a good prognosis for a second career, whatever it might be. And I just want to take a second, speaking of second careers, to thank NYTHA for their support. They've enabled us to double the number of horses that we take in from New York. So.
My name's Stacy. I'm from the Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance. We are an international organization, Canada and the U.S. We have 64 groups. They're all up there. I'll talk about it a bit more after this because we've got a lot of introductions to do. But yeah, if anyone has any questions today or after, please reach out to me.
I'm Rick Schosberg. I'm a director of New York Thoroughbred Horsemen's Association, head of the Aftercare Committee. And Andy Belfiore and I run the Take the Lead program for all the NYRA tracks. And what we do is we provide a service for the horsemen when they have a horse in need of retirement, regardless of their physical or mental situation. We partner up with the TAA-accredited facilities like New Vocations and like Rerun and like Aikendale, and hopefully the little orphans too, Lucky Orphans also. What we do is we have notices up all over the place, including in the condition books and on our websites. So people have really gotten to know us pretty well. Either they'll contact me or Andy. Matter of fact, just this morning we had 3 calls on horses that are about to be brought into the program. And the services we provide are a comprehensive veterinary exam, and we request, and we've had very little resistance with regards to any vet records, ultrasounds, x-rays, and vet reports, post-operative or surgical reports for horses. The idea is to get these horses, by the time the horse gets to the facility, they know what's coming. They know the physical status of the horse, probably a mental makeup on the horse also. We send videos, and we also try and send donation money with the horse. Okay, because we know that, you know, they're getting TAA accredited, they're TAA accredited, they'll get funding, but we ask the owners, and they've been fantastic about sending donations with the horse. And a lot will have to do with how much rehabilitation will be involved. Some horses, wonderful, they're just sound and maybe just weren't competitive here. Some horses have had minor issues, and some horses have had some pretty major issues. So it kind of depends on the rehabilitation once they get through that to get to the retraining. But it's the Take the Lead program. It's part of the Take Two. It's a subsidiary of the Take Two Thoroughbreds only show circuit also. And we're easily accessible, and we've grown quite a bit over the last 3 years.
Right. I'm Chris Andrews, and this is Marlene Peavy, and we are Aikendale Thoroughbred Rescue. We were founded by John Hettinger, who's a very well-respected and known horseman from the thoroughbred world. He founded us in 2006, and we are here to continue his mission. Any horse that was ever bred by Aikendale Farm has a golden ticket back to us for life with our program, as well as any horse that we adopt out. We have 157 horses in our program today. Of those, 130 are sanctuary that will live with us forever. Obviously, always keeping room for the Aikendales that come back around. And basically, we're at a point with our program where we just inherited the last piece of the Hettinger estate, which was his original training barn, which we're in the process of refurbishing. So we will relaunch a new rehabilitation and adoption facility on site here in Pauling. So we have 3 adoption satellite farms, one in South Carolina, one in Virginia, and one in Vermont as well. So we have some different outlets if there's ever anything that we can do to help anyone else as well. You know, we're here. Yep. That's all I can say.
I'm Andy Belfiore. I'm the executive director of the York-bred Thoroughbreds Association and the Take the Lead program and Take Two. In addition to Take the Lead, which I think last year we found homes with the TAA-accredited facilities for 98 horses, and donated, I think it was $137,000 just from the NIFA funding on their behalf for the retirement. That's over and above the $5 start fee that we do for the TAA, and over and above what the owners and trainers donate themselves. And in addition to that program, we have Take Two, which funds prize money and year-end awards for hunters and jumpers in thoroughbred-only classes. So that's to highlight the success of the retired racehorses as, you know, in their second careers. And just this year, we've started a new award, a year-end award called the Jet Run Award, which recognizes the aftercare facilities that, you know, transition these horses to their second careers. And it's just worked out that New Vocations had one of the winners. Southern Charm will be the Hunter Division, and Turning for Home in Pennsylvania had the jumper. So that will do the presentation of the retired racehorse training project in Lexington. That's our story.
My name is Beverly Tartaglia, and I'm with Finger Lakes Thoroughbred Adoption Program. This is Kim DeLong, who is the president, and I'm going to let her do the talking.
Finger Lakes Thoroughbred Adoption Program was founded in 2006, and we have a 16-stall barn with training arena, and 4 paddocks right on the grounds of Finger Lakes Racetrack. Delaware North Companies, which is the parent company of Finger Lakes, donated all the land, and with some help from the state, we were able to build the barn. And we're very happy that, you know, we can help these horses as they transition into their new careers. We only take horses that have either raced or trained at Finger Lakes, and this year we finally had to start asking for a $300 placement fee when they put them in the program, because we're just, you know, the money's not there. So, you know, we've gone as far as we could. We made it 10 years, so I'm happy with that, you know, that we didn't have to start charging the horsemen, but we are now. That's where we stand.
My name is Kate Starr, and I'm president of Sunshine Horses Incorporated. And I think I feel a little bit like the orphan here because I represent mostly standardbreds. We do have some thoroughbreds, and up until new locations came to New York, I feel like we're the largest standardbred adoption organization in New York State. We are run totally by volunteers. We have about 120 volunteers, and we have been placing horses. I founded in 2003, so almost 20 years, and we've stayed afloat. We do the same thing as far as the retraining, rehabbing, and rehoming of these horses. We take horses from all tracks, all states. We have sponsors, owner sponsors from several states, and they do sponsor their own horses. We don't ask for a donation, but they do sponsor their horses until they're adopted, as well as our volunteers also sponsor the horses. And we have currently 30 horses, about 3/4 of them standardbreds, and the rest thoroughbreds. Not sure what else to say, except I'm not sure why the standardbred industry and organizations aren't here.
That's okay, you're here.
That's right.
Designated representative.
I'm holding up a whole breed.
Very much.
Oh dear. Need some equipoise.
Oh no, wrong commission.
I am Deanna Mancuso. I am the director of Lucky Orphans Horse Rescue. We were founded in 2008. Unlike most of the people at this table, we are a sanctuary. Our horses are with us for life. We take all of the horses that really cannot be placed. We have Kissing Spine. The namesake of our organization is Lucky Orphan. He's now 24 years old, still alive and well, just not sound. But we are education focused. So we are developing a service learning program through local school districts, and we do EGALA work. So we are people helping horses heal people, full circle. Veterans, military, families, domestic violence victims, children afflicted with trauma. We're also natural lifemanship trained, which does a lot of brain work, how the brain develops with horses afflicted with trauma, abuse, neglect, starvation, and humans afflicted with trauma, and we put them together. And it's really amazing what can happen. So we focus a lot on the relationship and the healing of not only the horse physically, but also emotionally and mentally, and putting them together with the human. One of our most recent rescues was Livingston Appeal, who we found after shattering his knee, his first start. Somebody was trying to make him a jumper. And he is now the therapy horse. He'll never be ridden, even though he's only 9. He is the therapy horse for a human bilateral amputee who lost both ankles and feet when she was 8 years old and attempted suicide at the age of 13, and he keeps her alive, even though we are in turn keeping him alive. And that's what each of our 52 residents do for the community.
I'm Susan Wagner, president and founder of Equine Advocates. I founded the organization 21 years ago. And like Lucky Orphans, we are also a sanctuary. We have over 80 equines, horses, ponies, donkeys, and mules. About 1/4 of them are thoroughbreds and standardbreds. Most more thoroughbreds than standardbreds, but we have both. And we take in horses who have no one to speak for them, such as slaughter-bound horses. We interestingly took in a horse a few months ago. She's a mare that was in a kill pen, and she had been seized. She was one of the Paragallo horses. She was seized a long time ago, placed, and then ended up back in a kill pen. So we took her in. So we take horses that need a place for life. We have a thoroughbred named Freddie who had raced 51 times and then went on the show circuit, and then he was about to fall through the cracks. We also have an education program. We have an education center, and our main mission is to instill a sense of responsibility in people who have horses, so that people are responsible horse guardians. We have classes, and we reach out to schools, and education, I really feel, is the key to making sure that horses don't fall through the cracks, whether they go on to second careers or not.
I'm Lee Park. I'm the Director of Communications for the New York State Gaming Commission. I've worked with many of you for the past few years here. I'm in awe of the work you guys do. You guys are literally doing the grunt work as well as all the financial work and everything else. So you guys are the real heroes here in this. And there's many that aren't at this table that are also to be recognized. So whatever we can do to help augment your guys' work is what we're here for. As Commissioner Machete said, ultimately if we can get to a place where we can drive some resources, that's great. At the very bare minimum, I think where we can use the Commission's bully pulpit to help get the word out about the great work you guys do, and help organize things and just inform the industry of how important aftercare is, and promote the idea of retiring a racehorse while it's still sound, so that it has an option for a second career, for a long, healthy life after its racing days are over. So that's, again, glad to be here with all of you.
I'm Diana Pekulski with the Thoroughbred Retirement Foundation. This coming year will be our 35th year of keeping horses and helping people. We currently have about 800 horses in our herd. Most of them are sanctuary horses. We have 9 programs that are at correctional facilities, and by this time next year, that could be up to 11 or 12. We're in negotiations for 2 or maybe 3 new correctional facility farms. Those are great because while the horses are in letdown or rehab, short-term and long-term, or in lifetime sanctuary, they have a job because the inmates are dealing with them on a daily basis and learning. I mean, when we started 35 years ago, we just had no idea how therapeutic horses would be for people, and it's really great now, hearing how everybody is experiencing that, and it's really a wonderful thing. We, similar to Aikendale, take every horse back that was ever adopted out. If it ever needs to come back for any reason, we don't ask any questions. And we've been getting our horses for so many years directly from people who have their horses at the track. Many of our horses came through rescue or kill pen situations, or through things like Paragallo, or the thing last year in Kentucky with I erased her name out of my mind. Burrell. So we're there, for everybody if a horse is in need of full-time retirement or short-term and retraining. We've got 3 farms where we do retraining, one in Ocala, 2 actually in Virginia. One's at James Madison's Montpelier, and the other one at the James River Correctional Facility farm. So I'm thankful to be here, and thank you for all of these years of working with us and really trying to make something happen with the funding.
You guys have already talked.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
I want to hear from this again.
Listening to each and everyone's marvelous work you guys do, we greatly appreciate it. Just a little bit about me. Up until this month, I served as the director of the Division of Horse Racing and Power Wagering at the Commission. Prior to that, from 2008 to 2013, I was the executive director of the old Racing and Wagering Board, which was merged into the Gaming Commission. I previously worked in the state legislature for 21 years. I currently reside on a farm in Clifton Park. We have 3 horses and 5 goats, dairy goats. My daughter was an active hunter jumper like Commissioner Marchetti's and convinced me to get her horses about 20 years ago. So I now have 3 in my backyard, and as many as you, I was up at 6 o'clock this morning cleaning stalls. So, on to the agenda. Today we would like to accomplish a few items. First, provide a status update on a few of the various initiatives we have undertaken. 2, discuss some commission ideas for the future. And 3, and most importantly, open the floor to all of you who want to know what's working, what more can be done from a regulatory perspective, what challenges are you facing, what ideas do you have. First, the initiative update. A first in North American horse racing, the Commission has produced a film which debuted a year ago, featuring the many options for responsible horse aftercare in the state, including many of you and your organizations. New York State's Responsible Aftercare of Racehorses highlights the issues of responsible aftercare and what those in the horse racing industry should do to make sure horses have viable options after their racing days are over. As a condition of licensure by the state, the Commission requires all thoroughbred and standardbred owners, trainers, and assistant trainers to attest under penalty of perjury that they have viewed this film. The intent is to educate and further instill a sense of responsibility in those who participate in New York horse racing. Since its formal launch 6 months ago, the film has been viewed more than 2,250 times. In addition to being available to the public on the Commission's YouTube page, all New York State licensed racetracks and off-track betting corporations have the film to broadcast to their own audience as they see fit. We're going to run the film?
No, that's later.
That's later. Okay.
We already showed our film.
Okay.
People can go on our website to see it if they want to.
All right. Well, thoroughbred research. Well, as many as you know, to better gauge the scope of racehorse retirement, the Commission undertook a comprehensive research project to locate all New York-bred thoroughbreds that raced between 2010 and 2012 and haven't raced anywhere since then. The list consisted of 3,894 horses. This turned out to be a difficult project, necessitating invaluable assistance from the Jockey Club's Equibase database, the New York Thoroughbred Horsemen's Association, and the New York Thoroughbred Breeding and Development Fund. The aftercare organizations that are here with us today, plus many more, and finally, a general public call to action. Here is what we have found up today. We have located 1,871 out of the 3,894 horses, or 48%. Of the 1,871 horses we have located, 3 were confirmed to have been sold at auction, 356 are deceased, and then 1,512 are retired in some shape or form. Following, 604 were retired to broodmare, 422 were retired and have second careers, 327 were simply retired, 155 were retired adopted, 4 were retired to stud. We will continue to try to locate these New York-bred horses. However, the fact that the 2 years we have only found about half of the horses speaks volumes about the challenges of definitely stating just how many retired racehorses there are out there. So, you want to discuss that?
Yeah, I want to just raise, you guys have all been invaluable in helping track down these horses, and, earlier this year we put out a public call to action. We got about 150 responses. So, as Ron said, we're at about almost half the horses we found. What more can we do to track these down? Or I don't want to say call it. Stacy, you and I briefly spoke about this earlier, but, I think one of the issues we've discovered is that it is not easy to track where these horses are going, which goes back to a problem that Jack had on the task force on retired racehorses. There really was no bar in which to quantify the issue, which then, to Peter's point, makes it hard to kind of seek funding and resources if you can't put a number on it. So what ideas do you guys have in terms of what we can do to help track those horses down beyond what we've already done? Like, so we've gone to the Jockey Club and compared the list to the database. The Thoroughbred Breeding Development Fund has cross-referenced the list for broodmares. We put out a public call to action, like I said, and we heard from various people. What more can we do? Anybody have ideas?
I have a question to your question.
Yeah.
I mean, are you, is it like you want to find this herd specifically, or do you also want to, I think in some ways, like some of these horses in the bottom column might float up to the top column eventually, but as an ongoing process, and I just sort of mentioned it a little bit, maybe it's something that New York could think about being the first to do it in some way with, if you're all aware of what happens in Australia, that they have a first exit. So right out of the racetrack, the persons leaving with the horse have to say where this horse is going, and that is kept on file with the Racing Commission. So look, that's a big ask for the American racing all across our 38 jurisdictions and different commissions and stuff. But maybe as a state in this project, it might be fortuitous for you all to go and say, you know, at the stable gate when this horse leaves, can you please let us know where it goes? So you have the next step. The best part about being a TAA-accredited organization, from my point of view for a inventory, is that anytime one of the horses come in one of your groups, it's now locked into our horse farm management system at the Jockey Club, which they've given us, right, at the TAA. So those horses are never going to leave until you adopt them out, and then that's well beyond first exit from racing, so we know what happened. Right. But it's that missing gap for everyone, what happens when the horse comes from the owner or the trainer and they've left the racetrack, that we don't know how to answer that. This isn't the demise of all horses, I think, in a bad situation here, but that's a large number. That's 50% that you're missing, right? But that's normal, I think, everywhere. We all have that problem.
Why not, since they're used in a pari-mutuel business, why not say that the horses need to be licensed? So that you track, the horses they're going to be checked, right, as of a certain point. That way you can track the horses where they are, and it just becomes part of
it's already almost in place because Ag and Markets has the DAHP, which as a rescue I'm mandated, so I have mine. Anybody who sells horses from New York State should have one. Breeders are exempt. But if it's already in place that the inspector comes to the farm annually, Ag and Markets already has the paperwork in place. It just needs to include thoroughbreds.
And standardbreds.
And standardbreds.
Well, I think to your first question, we took this. It's literally a snapshot, right? It's horses that raced from 2010 through 2012 and had not raced since, and we limited it to New York Thoroughbreds because obviously we're in New York State, and we knew there was a pool of horses that we could readily identify. Yes. The intent here is to create a sample size, and I think we haven't expanded that sample at all. We're still working with that 3,800, however many horses it is. So whatever we can do to track those down, at least then we'll have a baseline, something that we can tell policymakers, tell the industry, tell the general public. Here's where, a sample of where horses go in one state, in one of 38 jurisdictions.
You're a long way out, though. I mean, these horses raced between 2010 and 2012. I think it makes sense to stop trying to find these other 2,000, right?
I mean, my sense would be that we really need to try to identify, what is the current and potentially future need. I mean, and we're getting some of that information. Lee put out a survey, and many of you in the room answered that survey. Because we had talked about, how do we get a sense of what's going on now? How many horses are leaving, Finger Lakes and the NYRA tracks, and how many horses are coming into all of the accredited programs that we have here? That obviously is only a fraction of the horses, but that seems to be at least one parameter of the need. Because when I was on a task force, it was a big struggle trying to identify, how many horses are we talking about? And I think we're beginning to, from the survey that Lee sent out and the responses, at least getting some sense of the magnitude. There's probably a lot of other horses, but they're not showing up on the radar screen at this point. And I'd like to hear people's thoughts on, what about other horses that aren't showing up, where we're seeing that they're either leaving the track and going through one of the track's programs, or they're not coming into any of the organizations around the table here.
There are two things going on. So in the world that we live in, and this is why I think we've been fixated on this herd that we're talking about, in order to convince people that you need something, funding, you must show them why, right? And so you can't just say we need it. It would be great. I mean, I think we all know you guys need it, right? If anyone is in the industry, you know how much money it takes to care for these animals. But if you're going to go to people outside the industry, you're going to have to answer questions. And see, I'm an impatient person. So when we first had this meeting, I said to these guys, well, let's get a system where we regulate and fund. And then these guys said, well, how much? How much does the industry need? And like, I'm sitting there thinking, well, I have no idea. And that's the start of the discussion. So I think the whole idea of getting the numbers in this particular herd was, all right, this is what happened to these horses. This is why we need the funding. So you get a universe, right? It's not wide open.
Right.
And then to what you're saying, the future, right? We need to keep track of them because we're falling behind. We're going to have to keep doing this.
Yep.
So last year, I think at the seminar, we talked about this a little bit. We didn't really get too far, unfortunately, but there was a lot of discussion about what do we need to do to make it, and I think it has to be mandatory, because it's a good idea to ask people, can you please tell us where you're going? But we know that doesn't work, right? It has to be a regulation. We have to get something in place that says, all right, when the horse is done racing, we want to know where the horse is going.
Yeah, to that point, like, I mean, I struggle with mandatory and funding, and it's not, you really can't tell people how to pay the money, or the one thing you can't do is ever take a man's horse in the old times. So I think I get it theoretically that the mandatory, but I also think that all of these groups that are here today have developed an infrastructure that is incredible. We didn't have this infrastructure 5 years ago. We didn't have this infrastructure 10 years ago. And if they get more funding, like Aikendale just is like walking in the room going, we look like we're going forward, we just got to check, and this might be a big deal for us. And now we're going to be like New Vocations and pump out hundreds of horses into second jobs, where we have this built infrastructure that's so awesome for horse racing, and standardbreds have also started to do this in a larger way, that it's starting to get to a point where if we don't fund, or say the number is we breed 10,000 a year, 20,000 a year, so if we don't fund the exit plan, then we can't control the arteries from bleeding out. We really haven't got enough, gauze to stop that.
But what does that have to do with,
I think, to his second point, so I understand this is a snapshot, it's a good one, it's the best one out there. I think this is a great snapshot of what's happening currently in 2010. We're missing 50%. We can't find 50% after a year and a half of looking for them. So, but that doesn't mean 50% are gone to their demise in a bad situation. It just means we have no tracking system. But the best tracking system we have is you and you and you and you and you and you, because then they're locked in.
I agree. I mean,
Your herd's one that's been controlled for 20 years.
right,
30 years.
so what you're saying then is, I think we're saying the same thing, that whether it's only at the time they exit the track or it's overall. I think it's more important that it be overall, because you can't trust people to tell the truth when they're leaving the track and then saying where the horse is going to go. So
well, that's true, and that's one thing's for sure. From the time that this snapshot was taken to where we are today, there's been an incredible amount of improvement being made.
Absolutely.
Because of the TAA and the accredited organizations and the organizations that monitor, and our organizations that we identify where every single horse goes, and we follow it along its path until adoption, and then the other agencies take over. What I'm more familiar with is the exit from the racetrack strategy. I don't think there's any funding needed there. I think you have to regulate it. I don't think it's going to cost anything to regulate it. You're going to have people that are going to give you pushback and people that are going to resist it, because they resist every kind of change. And I deal with it every single day. But I also sign horses out every single day to go to retirement. Where do they go? Farm, New York. Where do they go? Ocala. It's pretty simple if we just say this horse, red pen, retired, New Vocations, New York. Boom, it's already there. Put it into a data bank. it's not that difficult to do, at least in its implementation. It's just like every other regulation. It's going to meet with resistance, going to be slow going, but once it's in place, it'll be simple. Maybe change the sheets at the sign-out gate. Give a little more room to write stuff. There's a tiny little box. Where's the horse going? Who's taking it? Who signed it out? Maybe change that, make that simpler, and make sure that each sheet that gets done automatically gets put into an electronic data bank. Not wait for the end of the day, because by the end of the day, you got sheet after sheet after sheet. Guys going to a hotel with full vans and all this other stuff. Got to be regulated just a little bit more. It's going to meet with resistance, but so what? It's a good thing.
As you all know, I'm going to stand up for the standardbred here, and I went to the round table for the task force. I went to the last meeting here, and I appreciate you guys have so much energy and so much organization in what you're doing with the thoroughbreds. I think in order to get a correct snapshot of what's going on, we need to do the same endeavor with the standardbreds.
Yeah, one of my other roles is acting director of the Agriculture and New York Horse Breed Development Fund, the Harness Fund. And we have actually started a comprehensive review of all the horses that have been in the program for the last 10 years. As you know, the Sire Stakes program consists of the county fair races, the Excelsiors, and the Sire Stakes. So we're actually looking at every horse that was in the program going back 10 years, and we're going to try to determine where they are today. And the one good thing about the Sire Stakes program is that the fund itself has its own tremendous database of all the animals, where they are, where they were, what farms they were on back when they were in the program. So we just have to take that data, update it. We've got USDA information. So I think we're doing exactly the same thing.
What about horses that are not in Sire Stakes?
Well, we're first looking at these. We're figuring what the universe is, getting all those horses, and then we're looking at just New York breds. So we figured that was probably the best place to start. And given that we're looking at the county fair race, we're looking at different levels of racing, we think we're capturing pretty good sum of numbers.
I'm concerned just because of the large number that go to the Amish, and the Amish, there's no way we can regulate or determine what kind of care they're getting, and we've gotten quite a few horses from the kill pen this year that were Amished, and when they're done, they go to the kill pen. So, I mean, we can't guarantee what's happening to those horses in the Amish.
And that's really interesting, just to kind of segue it all together, is because I work with standardbreds as well. One of the two facilities that we have that work with standardbreds, and by all means, it's a smaller part of our program, but it's one that I think deserves the same amount of attention. But with Amish, and I've dealt with this personally firsthand, and had people, at the private side, even before I started working with the vocations, give me standardbreds off the track because they knew that they were kind of Amish bait. And something that the Amish provide, even if the trainer is hesitant to, say, can give the horse to the Amish because of that stereotype, and the way that the horses are treated or work there, is the money of it. That's the incentive. So, and I think on the other hand, you have regulatory means on one hand, and that's kind of like iron fist method. You have to do it. On the other hand, you have incentivizing, and I think there's a lot of, it's not a one or the other type question. You see this a lot in policy. And just a little bit of background, my background's in environmental science. That's what I did academically. I have my two lives, but my academic background was environmental, and a lot of it's policy. And you see similar things. So if we take a step back, think about recycling. So if we were to make recycling mandatory, you would still have outliers. A lot of people, you kind of create a black market in that sense, and that's innate. That's always in regulatory. You're never going to have 100%. But if you say we'll fine you if you don't recycle, sure, you'll have a lot of people who do that. But there's kind of the disgruntlement. There are certainly a number of cons, and on the pro side, you may get results, but in the meantime, it can cost a lot of money to regulate, and then you kind of still have a deviation in the market. On the other hand, if you have programs like recyclables that have the 5% return, so when you buy that bottle of water, say you're paying for that 5% already. The only way to get that 5% back is to take it to a recycling center that will give you that 5 cents back. So either way, you're paying it. The only way you're ever getting that 5 cents back is to properly recycle the material. So if we try to apply something like that, and by all means, I don't know how this would be implemented, but say the.
Well, to your point, and I don't know, I don't want to interrupt, but
Oh, no,
to
go
this
ahead.
point, one of the things that I run up against with is the van drivers that take the horses from racetracks. So there's guys that drive, we know their names, we know where they go, and they come in and they have a situation. And the issue, I think, at the racetrack level is that a trainer, not all trainers are making super big money. So if someone's offered a couple $100s for a horse, they'll take it, right?
The Amish will pay thousands for horses.
$8,000 for something, yeah.
I mean, the incentive is
So,
definitely
yeah,
money.
So we have no education, and not to take away from the fact that you guys ask the owners to give you money to go with the horse, but to think, and it's just a thought, just think about it. I'm not suggesting that this is how, I don't know if it would work, but the flip side is if you could give a trainer at a small track that is struggling and is that less than 10% making, the money, a stipend for their horse to end up in a program where it could be accounted for, humanely euthanized, and we are aware of where our bottles went, because I have the same feeling. Because we're talking about recyclables. I don't go to the end of my driveway and thank the guy that takes my bottles away. I never do. I probably should, right? But I don't, especially after a weekend. But, I really think that what we're missing here is we're always sort of thinking, this is, to your point, Commissioner, this is part of our industry. This is part of it. Whether we want to say it's, this amazing due diligence that we do and it's great and we're charitable, this is part of our business. Whether we want to be successful in it or not, aftercare, recycling, retraining, rehoming is part of what we need to sustain horse racing. This is a different age. We know that. And so maybe we're thinking about it wrong. This is a good point. The people that can afford to send their horse to an organization to be retrained and should. But maybe we need to have some funding for those fellas, those trainers that are pulling up in their 1975 truck, hoping that Betsy gets to the finish line this week, or we're selling to the
It's their
Amish.
blood money. I mean, that's how they survive.
Right, and I think the horses who are coming to our program already, there are a lot of trainers who are really cognizant, especially nowadays. There's a lot more awareness about what happens to the horses after they race, and there are a lot of trainers who are really willing and would love to send the horses to us, and and owners who want to send a donation with them, and that's great. But that's not, these are the horses who we've already accounted for. If we want to address the ones, the 50% that we don't, in horse training, I always go, my rule of thumb is making the right thing easy and the wrong thing hard. So if we can work maybe simultaneously, make the wrong thing hard through regulation, and incentivize making the right thing really easy, and maybe you get back a little bit of your registration fee. I don't know, but it's I think it's going to take a joint effort. I don't think there's any one solution. But if you want to get people to do something that they've never done before, say tell people or tell the commission where the horses are going, you've got to do something you've never done before, and I think it's going to take a couple different means, but it's addressing the people who aren't already doing it, not the ones who already want to.
It's going to take the overall approach, though, of saying we've got to track every horse. And there are many we won't have to track because they're already with people who are going to do the right thing. But we have to track everyone because there are so many that end up with people who are desperate. They need the money to feed the rest of the shed run that week. So.
And I think another way, we took a cut at York-breds and thought that was a good place to start, and I think that was a good decision. But when we looked at where did the York-breds race last, it was only a fairly small proportion that came from the tracks in New York on the thoroughbred side. And we really don't have any regulatory control over probably 75 or 80% of the horses that retire. So, looking forward, maybe it would make more sense to at least think about focusing on all the horses that race at the New York tracks and have that really as the group of horses that we want to really follow and take responsibility for, because that's what's happening here in New York. It's very difficult when horses that are New York breds, their last races, Mountaineer or Indiana Downs or, tracks like that, they're really out of our jurisdiction. But as long as the horses are racing in New York, if their last race is in New York, or they're leaving a New York track, at least I think from a regulatory standpoint, we have a chance to do something.
Can I say something? This is not my idea, but I have to give credit where credit is due. We honored Jeff Gorell this year at our event, and he owns 3 racetracks. He owns the Meadowlands in Jersey, and then he owns 2 standardbred tracks in New York State, Vernon Downs and Tioga Downs. And he believes that we need legislation. He thinks that, I mean, not everybody's in favor of legislation, but he feels that's the best way to control this, to pass a law where every horse is kept track of, and that it's mandatory that these horses are kept track of. And he also believes, and you know, this is just, I'm just throwing it out, but as a racetrack owner, he has a unique perspective on these things, that 1 to 2% of the annual take between the casinos and the racetracks could more than pay for all of this. But it would involve legislation. And I think that should be looked at. What do you think?
The question from a friend of mine, not to say who it was if the state gives over $200 million from slots towards purses, would it be possible to make a mandate for retirement programs? Well.
Well, you're talking about, I think, 2 different things, too. You've got tracking on one side. The tracking identifies where the horses go, but not who needed funding or who didn't. On the other side, you've got the funding, and I think you do have a mechanism right now where you could identify horses that required funding that retired from the New York tracks, because if you go to the TAA-accredited organizations that took these horses in, they know where the horses came from, and now you have a really good educated guess. Okay, we did 98 horses. All the other organizations did what they did. You take a look at those are the horses that we know need funding. A lot of the horses that we track don't need funding. So it's kind of apples and oranges what you're looking at. But I think right now it wouldn't be a very difficult task to identify the horses that were retired through accredited aftercare programs over the last 3 years and how much funding it took to get them from point A when they were retired to point B to rehome. Or if they're sanctuary horses, what it's going to cost to let them live out their lives in the sanctuary.
I can tell you that from our experience, that it fluctuates geographically because we're across North America. So the cost of retraining a horse is between $285 a month to $685 a month. It fluctuates a lot because the cost of hay is incredibly different when you're in California than if you are, and sometimes, somebody has a facility that's more expensive.
But we would know that, right?
Yeah,
we know where the horse ended up, what it specifically cost for these horses, and how much funding they got from TAA or from Take the Lead or from the owners and trainers, and what the shortfall was. We needed $1 million to cover these horses over the course of a year, or $100,000, or whatever it might be. But I think if you look at that, it's going to give you a really good idea of what funding, and I think that information is available right now.
I think one of the things that we don't know, and I started to think about it and discuss it a little bit recently, is, what is coming in from the industry? And I think one of the future research projects that talked with Lee a little bit about is, identifying, how many starts are there from, the syndicates and some of the big owners as a starting point, and then doing a survey, what do they do with regards to aftercare? Do they make contributions? I mean, I think that's really an unknown, and it would be a piece of what you're saying we need. What's that gap? I mean, that's what we've always, in the days when I was on the task force, trying to identify. What's the gap? We know that there are resources. There are more resources now than there were then, but there's still a gap, and I know all of us are going to fundraisers and helping with fundraisers and all that so that they can continue to do their work. And maybe that's, to add one more piece to this puzzle, so then we can identify what a true gap is and answer Peter's issue, how much do we need to go out there and say, okay, here's what we need and here's why we need it.
Yes, are we talking about, when you look at the entries which I make the mistake of doing almost every week, the entries at Mountaineer, Charlestown, and National, and you see all these New York horses that really need to be retired, and you feel like, wow, I have no control over. I've had donors who have asked me to track horses and try to get horses purchased or claimed, and then before you know it, the horses gone and trainers not returning your calls. So are we talking about following the New York-breds when they go to places like this and, coming up with some sort of incentive, or I guess it would have to be an incentive or a partnership or something with the other tracks so that we can do something to help those horses as well? Because when a horse retires from Belmont or Saratoga or Aqueduct, I mean, it's pretty easy. Like, this is these people are here, they have money, they're all good people, they've got you guys at NICA, and they do the right thing.
Well, to Diane's point, I mean, any horseman's group outside of New York that's starting to think about aftercare, I have them call Andy and say, talk to them about how they do it. Because once the infrastructure is there, what came first, the cart or the horse? Is the aftercare program or the funding or the intention, right? So if we can get the state, let's take, Louisiana, for example, it doesn't have an accredited organization. But if we can get the state on board and the horsemen's group who call up Andy and say, how do you do it? We can raise some money, and then we can get an organization there. Then we can educate the backstretch, which you already do. So really, New York is the great blueprint, and your evolution's a little ahead of everyone, and that's great. It could be bigger, it could be better always, right? But so much better than most. So in that way, I think we have a really good infrastructure. It's almost like, in my frustration with the TA is, the industry asked it to be built. It's built. It works. Now we need the money. And that's sort of what you have. It's built. It works, right? You've got great organizations, and they do a really great job for everything from prison programs to retraining to future retraining, working with the Finger Lakes group. So that's all there. It's a funding issue. It's not change. That doesn't change. It's a funding issue for the industry.
Well, we discussed that at the IFAR conference down in Washington. And Alan Gutterman, you'll remember, is a good friend of mine and always thinks outside of the box as a marketing expert. Came up with a possibility of having on every big racing day for every racetrack, and every racetrack has a big day or two or three, even Sunland Park or something like that, have a percentage of admission fees go directly to TAA, and the people would do it. It's a little bit of a conundrum on financing it and getting the accounting right, because it would have to go to 501c3 if it's going directly to TAA or others. But thinking outside of the box, that's what this needs, because you guys are in the 2.7, 2.8 range, should be 10 million, yes. At least 10 million. You're getting the participants, not just the owners and the trainers, because they put in their $5 fees and stuff, and we ask for donations, and we do fundraisers, and the sales percentages and the stallion managers and everything. Get the fans involved, because they love that stuff. They'll grab a hold of a horse. They love it, They can follow a horse through its retirement, Get the bettors involved. Horses, maybe have a wagering thing where a certain day of the week or a certain day of the month you have an aftercare day where a certain part of the handle can run to it. You'll generate millions before you know it. It's not nickel and diamond. This is big stuff. You can do your fundraisers, and that's one. You pass the hat, that's one. It doesn't generate revenue. You got to revenue. You got to generate resources on a big way. So you have the big cap, you have the Belmont, you have the Breeders' Cup, you have the Kentucky Derby. Those are the days where you can generate an enormous amount of money by a simple $5 fee.
Besides, it reflects very much better on the industry if we're taking care of our own.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is the industry
we don't know where these horses land.
The industry is feeding in. It needs to feed in 3-4 times what it is. There's no doubt. 2.7 is wonderful. It's not close.
But to get back to your point, Lee, I think this numbers thing is an important thing to do. I think you should keep doing it. It's the question I get asked a lot, and it's one we need to find a way to, besides calling up the girls I know that are pulling horses or talking to van drivers or what's going on in Texas.
Yeah, it's
shoe
leather detective work.
Yeah,
exactly what it is.
But from going back to the point of, say, in our situation at NYRA, it could start tomorrow. It just making sure that when the horse is signed out through retirement, and when we retire a racehorse, we let the NYRA know through Dr. Veterosa, and he puts it in because he'll sometimes I'll find out through him that there's a horse, or a trainer went to him and said, do you know, if they're not aware, a small trainer not aware of our program. So we're tied in with NYRA and the Gaming Commission also. So the information's getting them, okay? But with regards to exiting the racetrack, I don't see that it's anything but a simple fix. It really should be, at least to get it started. You know, you can at least get it down on paper, and then you can put it into a data pack, and then all of a sudden you can do what we do with the horses.
That would certainly address a long term.
It seems like a solution. Seems like something that
the 2-year frame we were looking at was to create a snapshot in lieu of that, so we didn't already have it. But you're right. I think there's. I mean, well, I don't want to speak on behalf of the commission, but I think it's certainly something that we could look at.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, just come up to the table so we can get you on the camera.
I don't want to be on the camera.
Okay, so we can hear you. So we can at least hear you.
I'm in the witness protection. Okay, so we're going to kneel.
No, you're fine. You're fine. You don't even kneel. Please.
So we're talking about Tom Gallo, president of New York Thoroughbred Breeders. So we're talking about tracking. One thing that we do as horsemen, we do matter of fact, is we do health certificates when horses have to ship. So I think a faction that's missing at the table right now is veterinarians, because if we get cooperation from the American Academy of Equine Practitioners, and we set up a system where they register, all they have to do is once they make out a health certificate is required when you ship a horse out of state. You have to give the destination and the name of the person where the horse is actually going. So you already have that information. It's on file. It's on a health certificate. If you get the veterinarians maybe to just register, just to type into a database what health certificates they've made out. And then maybe from the standpoint of in tracking, we already have a regulatory agency here at the table, the Gaming Commission. We have a registry here, the New York Thoroughbred Breeding and Development Fund. If maybe New York State started by now you don't need a health certificate to go in state. You just need health certificates to go out of state. Am I right?
Yeah, or to another state or another track.
Or another track, or another race.
If you're going to Finger Lakes, you should have a health certificate.
Right, exactly. Okay.
But if you're going to a farm, it's not necessarily a requirement.
So
I think it should be.
So last year we talked a little bit about, or not me, but I mean, in the symposium last year about what they do in Europe as far as a horse passport. In Europe, horses travel with a passport, and everything, the identity, the vaccination schedule, the whole history, ownership history, travels with the horse. So, and this was brought up last year. So I think the first step to that might be, without getting into, you have to take steps in order to do this, and you have to find funding and stuff like that. But maybe the easiest thing would be to require veterinarians in the state of New York to simply do a health certificate, not only to racetracks, but from farm to farm. The vets would love it because they get to charge for it. And yes, you might get a little pushback from some of the owners, but essentially you'd be tracking horses in state, and then as soon as they make out the health certificate, you know exactly where the horse is, and then you can locate that horse. And then if that horse moves again, they're required. From the standpoint of a regulatory agency, if the person did not do the requirement of a health certificate, and that's where the horse disappeared, then there would be some sort of fine or some sort of penalty to that person. And I think that would make people really stand up and take notice, because, looking at these numbers, you got 2,000 horses in 2 years. Now we're talking about another 4,000 horses. Now we're missing maybe 6,000 horses to date. So I think, the quicker we do something, all get together. But I think veterinarians would be willing to do that, A, because they'd probably figure out a way to charge for it, but B, they have a giant database that they use anyway, so I don't think that would be that big a deal.
Do you think that you mentioned the trucks that leave the racetracks, standardbreds and thoroughbreds, those people, we're not sure where those horses are going, and certainly the Amish,
Are you saying that they should get a health certificate?
Yes, yes, every time a horse moves, they have to have a health certificate. And in getting a health certificate, you would have name and address and destination of where the horse is going. And on the health certificate, the current health and disposition of the horse. Because that's what we're required to do when we ship thoroughbreds to Florida or from racetrack to racetrack.
So where do they keep the other copy of the health certificate?
The vets actually have, it's a triplicate, right?
It's 3 copies.
It's 3 copies.
Original and 2 copies.
And one of them gets sent in to one of the state agencies.
Yes.
That's have to send.
Do you get a copy of that?
Aggie-Mark.
Department of Markets.
Department of Ag?
Thank you.
And that's again, the Department of Ag and Markets has the DAHP that is supposed to regulate a sale of every single horse. Just turn it on for the thoroughbreds. And standard breds.
And at the same time, the registration papers that we have for thoroughbreds, those follow the horse. But then I learned many years ago from Diana when we were up at a racetrack that just vacated that, she said, she gave me the horrible reality that people will leave the horse and leave the Jockey Club registration papers tacked to the barn door. See, I listen. You make quite an impression on me that day. So essentially, does the guy take the papers with the horse, or does he just take the horse? But I think if you had veterinarians involved and then the gaming commission involved, where there was a tracking and then a penalty, then we might be able to. But the point about the Jockey Club papers, where the Jockey Club papers follow the horse. If you could come up with a horse passport that also followed the horse, and with the health certificates, you knew that passport was going with the horse into the next person's hands, that would give you, an idea. That would essentially track the horse.
Digital now, so
Yeah,
there won't be any
everything's
more
digital,
papers,
global
yeah,
batlink and
after
everything.
this,
Yeah.
Well, and also in the Coggins, like there is a space for tattoos. So theoretically, that information is there, and in New York State, at least every 2 years, it's required. So if the horse is alive and somewhere, there should be that information.
Some of the heel pen papers that come in.
Right, exactly.
Some they come as gelding instead of mares,
Right. But theoretically, that information somewhere, and especially if it's soon enough when they come off the track, the tattoo's still visible. I mean, at a certain point, when they start to be lost down the lines.
And now we do have some big veterinary clinics coming into New York, namely Rood and Riddle, that have ties to Kentucky, and they actually have another clinic in Florida. So they have fingers going out to different parts of the country. And I'm sure that Scott or Dr. Woody, if they were part of this dialogue, I'm sure they could also think of ways to maybe make this a little more efficient and ways that they could help, just basically track the horse.
Nothing less, you might be able to find some of those horses on the list that you're looking for, where they're lost.
So,
Hello. Hi.
Dr. Palmer is here.
Medical director.
Oh, there's Dr. Palmer.
And as far as getting veterinarians involved in this, I think that all these ideas are worth exploring, and I don't want to sit here and pour water on anything, but I can tell you that the bigger problem about this is how do you manage the databases? How do you get the databases to talk to one another? So so let's not dismiss the idea that veterinarians have these databases, because most of them don't. There are a lot of veterinarians that don't like computers or don't use computers, so that's a major obstacle to something like this. But I think just reflecting on your comments, I think actually with the chip idea coming along, the Jockey Club database could track movement of horses. All you got to do is have a chip reader at every racetrack, and every time they leave, it goes in a Jockey Club database, and they could follow it. Those are the people that have got the databases. That's what they do. The Encompass solution system that's all they do is manage data. So I think that the cheapest and most efficient way to do something like this is to go big. All the local stuff isn't going to work. It's got to be big because these horses go everywhere. And so without a database, it's going to include all states, for example, or all racing states. We're still going to lose horses. And I think your best shot of tracking them is going to be with some kind of a database. It's going to be a single database that other people, we can all access it, perhaps. You can get reports from the Jockey Club and find out, like, I could ask the Jockey Club for a New York report about blah, blah, blah. So you could do the same thing with, I'd be amazed if they wouldn't jump on this. I think it's a real good fit, actually.
The Jockey Club had no problem helping the TAA start a horse farm management so that we can just go and access with them, no problem, yeah.
But I can't emphasize enough, the problem is who's going to keep the data and how can you get access to it? Otherwise, all this isn't good. You know, it's got to be one database someplace. Who's best to do that?
Good rhetorical question.
Well, no, I think it's
It's
not
not
just the
rhetorical.
Jockey Club, for sure. And that way, if over time, right, because some horses will disappear, but probably over time, you'd be able to determine where those horses were last before they disappeared, and then, you know, crack down on those leaks and, you know,
But yeah, in Australia, their study after 2 years is outstanding, and I'll send it to you, Lee, because it's amazing what Elliot's done.
Well, they're an island, that's why.
I get that. But they're 10,000 horses a year, or 20, and they have done this systematically, watched it, and followed up for 2 years where the horses went, and the numbers of success that horses landed in good spots, particularly we're talking about the gelding that didn't race anymore, is huge. They have a very small percentage that end up in a bad spot.
Well, I know there's people working on closing the borders of the United States to horses that are going to slaughter. I think if the borders were closed, you know, to the extent that's possible, it would help us dramatically. You know, you need, right? You'd have many more horses euthanized, but that's better than where they're going.
If I could just offer a different topic, just for a lot of people that might benefit from, who maybe aren't as familiar with aftercare. If some people could talk to about the importance of retiring a horse while it's still sound.
Thousands of dollars a horse. Thousands of dollars per horse.
I mean, it would allow us to help so many more horses every year. Our cost, you know, we have 130 horses in sanctuary that will live at our farm forever, and that number grows every year. No matter how hard we, you know, hope that we can find creative homes for some of the non-ridables. But I mean, thousands of dollars per horse. I mean, just crazy numbers.
It costs us about $5,000 a year per horse because we have help to take care of them. So that's basically that's provided the horse doesn't get sick.
Sure.
But just average cost, that's what it costs us per horse.
We just sponsored a seminar that Patty Hogan did for us over at Basic Tiffin last week. And at our request, because we've seen over probably the last 10 or 12 months, a higher incidence of more serious injuries being retired. And so we talked to her about, you know, can you come in with a program for the horsemen and help them with identifying issues before they turn into bigger issues. And if you didn't get to see it, I think we have it on tape. It was brilliant. And it wasn't so scientific that it went over everybody's head. It was a lot of common sense stuff. It did emphasize the fact that we have new technology involved with C-scans and MRIs are available, portable MRIs are available, and we have the Ruffian Clinic across the street. But identifying when horses are just trying to tell you that, you know, it's getting to be about that time, maybe we should do dive down a little bit deeper in my physical well-being and not try and push me through another workout or another race. And the seminar was fantastic. It got rave reviews, and I think everybody should read it. And I hope it has an effect, because for your guys' sakes, and for the sakes of the owners, and of course, especially for the wellness and the health and well-being of the horse, that we should get these horses to you guys try and get them there a little bit earlier, so that you have less rehabilitation and more retraining quicker rehoming. And I think that would help us all out. So I think if you haven't seen that seminar, see it. And I'll talk to my colleagues about it also. Because you're always going to have horses get injuries. There's low tendons and there's slap fractures that just show up. But I think Scott's done a lot of seminars on that same thing. Know beforehand what you may be dealing with and prevent it. You know, put the brakes on first. But it would help the whole entire aftercare industry move along at a much better pace, and less funding would be required to help out with the rehabilitation. Instead of 3 or 4 months of rehabilitation or more, we get them right to Leander where she can start retraining them instead of having to go to the aftercare the rehab facility, or with Lisa, going to Lisa and spending 3 or 4 months with Lisa on the hose, in the ice, and getting x-rays and like that until the retraining part starts, which should be 30 to 40 days because they're so good at what they do. And then you get people that are interested in these animals.
How do we access the seminar?
Andy?
I don't have it up online yet, but I'll let you know.
We just had it. It was just a week ago.
Okay.
So we're working on this.
And it's through the Racing Commission?
It'll be on the gaming commission, or it'll be
No,
night?
that was for night.
That was a night thing. That was a night thing.
But along those lines, the gaming commission, just last week, Dr. Palmer held 4 hours of continuing education for trainers that focus primarily on, there's a lot of talk about the fetlock and various types of pre-existing is the right term to use, but risk factors or warning signs or things to look out for. Those actually, we just put those online literally in the past 24 hours, so they're on the commission's YouTube page.
It's a really important topic, and I applaud any efforts made to help people make good decisions like that. But there are some real significant challenges that need to be addressed, and one of the big ones is that if you're going to tell a horseman it's time to stop, you better have some objective criteria to do that, because he's not going to know, and he's not going to want to know, because he's got commercial pressures acting on him. I mean, let's be reasonable. We don't do this stuff in a vacuum. This is an industry, and people are out there who are dependent upon keeping horses in competition to make a living, and that's the honest fact. So, that's a wonderful thing. We wouldn't be sitting here if we didn't have an industry, because we wouldn't have any horses. So, don't get me wrong. This is not a denigration whatsoever. It's just a reality check. That when you turn to me and tell me that it's time to turn this horse out and stop racing him, I'm going to say, how do you know that, Don? What makes you think so? And I can give them a lot of information. We're doing a lot of research on this at Cornell University right now, trying to identify, how to identify horses at risk of injury, serious injury. And we got some real progress in the last few years about that. We're putting together some very exciting tools to be able to help horses make that decision, looking at bone density and epidemiologic risk factors, and creating something called a FRAX, which is it's named for a process that's used in human medicine where they try to predict the probability of an older person in a nursing home getting a hip fracture. And because that's a really big economic problem. These folks, my family, your family, when they get older and they go into these facilities and they break their hip, it's often a death sentence. It's a really, really big problem. So they have a means of predicting that. Okay? So we're putting together right now data to help make a toolkit like that will help horses predict when it's time, or it's soon time. Right now we can predict horses that have high probabilities of fractures, but we can't predict when. They could go out and race 10 times and we finally go out the next race and have a problem. So, it's really challenging, but I can tell you we're working on it. But you need objective data because this is a very tough decision to make. And, everybody says, well, let's stop now. Well, we've got this great successful racehorse. It's made $1 million in his career. He's raced for 6 years and has 42 starts. And he's been in the money every time he's been out there. And let's have a celebration. Let's have put a blanket on him and have a celebration at the racetrack and have lunch with Chris Kay. But, that's a tough call to say now's the time to do that. Really tough call. So we're working on it. And it's anything, and, the question is how do you stop? I guess the expression is squeezing the last drop out of the lemon, is what we're trying to avoid. I can tell you that I spoke with Anna Ford about this topic just a little while ago at Saratoga here, and she told me that she was concerned because she felt like she was seeing more lame horses and sore horses than she had in the past. And I said to her, well, I think honestly, part of the problem is we're taking a lot of horses that are not sore lame, and they're being rehomed really pretty quickly and easily, and they're being sold. in some cases. So you're not getting that subset of horses anymore into your group. So it's not so much that the horses are in worse shape, it's just I think the dynamics have changed quite a bit with the new options and the new, the major efforts made to get horses on at horse shows and competing again. So that's been a great outlet, but it also has shifted the population a little bit so that the sanctuaries are going to get horses that are going to be in rougher shape. And that's going to be a challenge for us all to work with.
It's also the popularity of programs like ours that are getting, moving along and every year increasing numbers just because, the word's getting out there that we're here. And some of those horses that were pretty sore were going to another racetrack and going through their program. Instead, they're calling us now and say, instead of sending this horse to Penn National, it's a 2 out of 5 lane, which down there, nothing against them, but maybe a 1 out of 5 down there. Let's just stop now. So, but we're still getting a 2 out of 5 lane horse, and I'm asking you guys to take it. Here's the X-rays, here's the ultrasounds, here's the post-operative, the post-op report, and here's $2,000 to go with it, and I hope it can get you through the rehab. And if it doesn't, we'll help you out.
I think
There's a lot of that.
It would be helpful too to, whether it was a study or some sort of program or work with some of the drug companies to help us deal with arthritis and, sort of the lameness that comes from wear and tear. Because lots of people who adopt horses don't have the resources to do Adequan or give the horses, the Equilox or things like that. And, maybe there'd be some sort of partnership between racing, veterinarians, the companies that provide drugs that could help us with that kind of thing.
And this is kind of it's a totally different aspect of it and may have no value to our conversation for more practical means, but just as a trainer, I feel obligated to also mention the difference it can make to a horse as an individual to stop racing them when they need to be stopped. And that can be before an injury. Horses are extremely emotional creatures, and I had heard a while ago, so I say it again, they have almost in relative capacity, they have like double the capacity for emotion that we as humans do. But I guess maybe a quarter amount of the space is what I had heard to process that. And things like pain can trigger really deep parts of their brain. And like what I do as a trainer, I tell people all the time that it's more mental often than it is physical, because what you're doing at a very scientific level, this is not just like emotions as fluffy, light topics. A lot of what we do is retraining the neurologic pathways to reinforce a more positive connection between, say, I get on the horse's back, and instead of bolting because they've been so trained as a reflex to pain, perhaps, and sometimes it's just sort of an anxiety or a PTSD, is that we're retraining, we are reinforcing a more positive connection to being ridden, to having interactions with people. It's not always a positive experience, and that might not be because they're abused. It might be because they just didn't want to do that, or racing is not for every horse. So to stop a horse when they're non-competitive and not just squeeze that last drop out of the lemon can make a huge difference, not only monetarily, but on the well-being, the quality of life as a whole for the horse. I have a horse who was just adopted from New Vocations, or had a horse rather, at my facility, who was raced 83 times and won in the entirety of his career less than $110,000. That's less than $2,000 a race. Why the hell was that horse still raced? I can't for the life of me imagine, but I can tell you that horse had a whole lot of anxiety. So I wanted to touch on that just so it's out there, and so it's something, another thing to keep in the mindset, especially of trainers, because maybe that's not something that is on the forefront of everybody's mind. Everybody mentions the money of it, but hell, on the ground, I can tell you, it makes it a huge difference to stop a horse when it's time to stop, whether it's from injury or because they just aren't meant to be a racehorse, because they're not all.
But according to that, then you're going back to the basic horsemanship.
Sure.
And that's what has lost so much of this industry is the horsemanship. So I'm more for her as in going back and the incentive when that horse isn't winning so much to give it to us. That way it's off quicker and they have the incentive so they don't keep racing it for 80 times when it's not going to run.
But and also it should be mutually beneficial.
Issue.
Yeah, and it should be mutually beneficial because in Saratoga the cheapest training barn maybe is $200 a day. I could be wrong about that, but there's some sort of disconnect. I mean, there should be that connection.
Right, because you're getting the higher end of it, the better owners and stuff. We need to focus on the.
It's not cheap to keep them there.
No, I agree, and that's one of the things that we, in our program, what we do, and it's more like 100 a day. But no, there are add-ons, maybe all in all with vet work and everything, it may be that. But with a program like ours, and if you get the paperwork and all set up and we can get a check and we can get all the vet work and everything done, I can get the horse off the grounds in 3 or 4 days. Yeah. Okay. If you delay or if you wait along, I mean, every 10 days is $1,000. Right. Every 20 days, $2,000. Every month, $3,000. So we're trying to help you. We're trying to help Naira because there's a horse on the grounds that probably shouldn't be on the grounds. Maybe there's a horse that should be on the grounds.
Yeah.
That is more viable to their product also. So yeah, it's beneficial to everybody. But it goes back to the basic horsemanship. It's the health and well-being of the horse. It's the health and well-being of the industry. Yeah. Period. It's not rocket.
And keep in mind, everybody works on commission. So I mean, horses aren't earning money. The trainers don't want them in the barn. The owners don't want them.
The day money doesn't cut it.
Paying because trainers don't make, despite some opinions, the trainers don't make money on day money with workman's comp and all the expenses that they have. They don't make money on day money. So they need a horse in the barn that's scoring. If the horse isn't scoring, then we have a conference and they say, I think this horse is better off running someplace else or maybe retiring. So I think right now, because of the cost, I think horses are retired a little quicker and they are retired a little sounder because it just doesn't make economic sense at $65,000 to $75,000 a year per horse to keep that horse in training, in the New York circuit. So
a lot of the mental health stuff that I do is based around resiliency. Clients with trauma, veterans. It's all about resiliency and being able to bounce back to a new life, to a better life, to a healthier life. And maybe going with what you said, if there was a resiliency program for horses that maybe shouldn't be racehorses, take them out of work sooner and offer them a resiliency, a new life, basically, as a retired racehorse.
Right, but then you're back to depending on horsemanship.
Right, no, exactly. But when you bring the finances into it, it almost makes sense.
It does.
So guys, we're going to end up pretty soon, and then every month, Lee and myself and Jack and Rahan and maybe others are going to sit in a room over at the commission talking about aftercare, right? Every month, and we're going to say, all right, what should we do? What do we need to do? And we need a little guidance, because they're great ideas going back and forth, but I mean, it's really hard to track all of them. So in order of priority, and it's not what we wish, because we can't do that, but what's the priority as far as needs? To give us some idea of what, when we go back, right, we sit down and we're trying to plot out a way to help you. We need to know what you need.
And Commissioner, I'd really like to say that. I think it's important that everyone understands this is the industry sat down and met about this. Rick Violet was there, a lot of people were there, and said, what do we need to do? We have all these variables, whether we're talking about horsemanship or we're talking about the logistics of money and really, are we going to stop training a horse or not train a horse, or what do we need to do? And the reality is we needed to have an exit plan. And so we said, okay, let's find an exit plan. And we worked for 5, 6, 7 years now working on an exit plan that gave a sustainable ability for the horses to come out of horse racing and to represent us in the best aftercare position as all. So we've accredited 64 organizations across North America. They do a great job. We have barns in Texas that are big and beautiful with empty paddocks that don't have any horses in them because they don't have enough funding to get the horses into the organizations, to get them retrained and get out there. So they're being picked up at Texas and they're taken over to Mexico, and there's an opportunity of 20 horses, sound or not sound even, right? Whether we're 1 month out or 2 months out or however many months. The basic problem we have, and it comes always up, but then there's this discussion, and that variable, and that variable, and that variable. It comes down to funding. If these guys don't have enough money to do their job, then there's no point in me doing my job. There's no point in accrediting them. They're all wonderful. These guys have made it to the gold standard. We set the bar this high, and they got there, and they keep getting there. And every time we say, okay, there's another report we want you to fill out, and by the way, could you please set 4 quarter reports on who you got in inventory, and you need to have these documents in, and you need to report on this. Diana can tell you, we know every single horse in our herd.
But I would say, because I know for you to get to that point, it's first about reporting and about numbers. And I would say the first thing to do is get the jockey club to the table and talk about monitoring and keeping track of the horses that are leaving the state before going through the exit program, so that then you can do a better job of going to the legislature and saying, we need more.
I agree. I think that's absolutely true.
Because I think that's the first step to getting more funding.
See, we're regulators, like I said in the beginning, at the commission. And we can do certain things, which I think Lee and Rob Williams and Jack have been doing, which is give you guys a platform, so there's publicity, so there's interest, to kind of say to everyone, hey, there's a big issue here, it's aftercare. When all the applauding ends, there's aftercare. So we can do that, but I mean, I sense that you need much more than that, obviously. So we're able to do that. You got the video out, it's great, and we have the seminars, we do all that. So yeah, we, as regulators, there's a limit to what we can do, but I do believe we can do things. We just need the information, and then we need some help, I think.
When I applied to be TAA accredited, one of the questions was, do you have the permits and licenses that your state requires? And I took a step back and I said, what permits and licenses does my state require? So I did some homework and I got my permit. So if the permit is required for all of us at this table as aftercare, why is that permit that exists already not enforced during pre-aftercare? And how can we bring, in addition to the Jockey Club, Ack and Marcus to the table to say, this already exists, the book is there. Horse sold to, delivered on, came in on what date, with Coggins, rabies, etc. The book is, it's already there.
Good rhetorical question.
I'd like to recognize Lisa Lloyd, who joined us, and give her an opportunity to chime in from
Sorry, I was late. We just got back from the Hampton Classic. We took an old horse and we took a youngster, a New York-bred Frost Giant, and they showed at the Hampton Classic, and they were in the Grand Prix ring, and we spent the entire weekend there meeting and greeting and re-educating people about what retired thoroughbreds actually are like and how well they do. And it got a lot of media coverage. But I agree with Dr. Palmer, the whole dynamic of this has changed just in the past 10 years since I worked with New Vocations. We used to get the sound horses, and we got the lame horses, and then the really lame horses you never saw again. Now, there's a lot of private flippers that are coming in, they're going to the track, they're picking up all the clean horses or suspectedly clean horses, and then the rest are all filtering through to programs. And in order for us to take those horses, we have to educate the public, which we was talking about with Dr. Hogan at the NIFA seminar, about injuries and what the extent of the injuries are, what they mean. A lot of people won't touch horses if they have screws. A lot of people won't touch horses with bows. So we need to re-educate the public about what the injuries really are and what kind of effect they have on a second career. And I think, we also need to figure out a way to more effectively market those kind of horses, because that's pretty much out of every horse I get, I would say 70% have injuries. So we have to find a way to actively promote and educate people about them. But it's significantly changed. Thankfully, we have people like Mr. Knowlton, who just gave us a completely clean horse, and actually Mr. Gallo. And there is a bigger drive, and I think there's more education amongst the owners and trainers to get those horses retired quicker. But there's always more that you can do.
One of the initiatives we just are coming out with probably within the next week with the Sire Stakes program is we're actually putting out a handbook on prospective ownership. And that handbook will have what it means to be a standardbred owner, the cost involved, a veterinarian, how to pick a trainer, and we have a big section on aftercare. We actually mentioned Sunshine. So we feel that's going to be a powerful way for people when they go to the sales. They'll get the booklet. It'll be all about owning horses in New York, and it'll have a major section on what happens after the horse retires from racing.
I think that's great. I mean, and that's one thing. We put horses up, say you put them up on social media, and somebody go, oh, it looks like it's got a boat. Yeah, it has a boat. Can't ride those at all. And so you're fighting against that all the time. So we really need to work more collectively to explain to people what limitations they don't have.
Yeah, and it talks about the video and where you can access that, and then a few other things. And then it lists all the standardbred retirement centers in New York.
One of the problems, though, is there's always plenty of horses.
Yeah.
There isn't always plenty of money.
Yeah.
I mean, if we opened our doors, oh my God. Right now we have 6 in waiting. And if we opened our doors to the kill pens, we'd have 20 in waiting. Okay. And we just don't have the funding for that. So we're turning horses away.
But education is an important part of that, too.
That's what I mean. If people were more likely to come to me and they're like, okay, well, I want to do dressage. I'm not really intending to jump much. And I go, well, I've got a horse that had a non-displaced conduit. It's got a couple of screws and it's good to go. And the vet says it's good to go. We work with 3 or 4 different vets, plus Dr. Hogan. It's like a vet's weight, it carries 10 times more weight than what my experience or my opinion does. If we can get people past that where they'll take them, then the door opens to take another one. I mean, you can move them through faster.
Do the vets donate that time?
Yes, a lot of them do. And the other thing that
donates any time.
The other thing that I would suggest then you shop around for a vet. One of the other things that ours do as well, one of our vets, he donates like generic Adequan and Legend, and then when we adopt the horse out, say if it needs Legend, it says in the contract, for the lifetime of the horse, we will provide a vial of Legend every single month, and the vets help us out. I have another vet that provides all the drugs at cost, which we're able then to assist adopters with. I mean, if it's as simple as getting a horse into a home and providing them with a vial of Adequan a month, I mean.
But then you're back to funding, so if they do something to regulate the funding or get more funding, then you get
Then you would have to try to Groundhog Day, But I also think, I mean, we work with.
Yeah, there you go.
We work with 3 or 4 different vets, and I mean, they're kind of big name vets, and. I always say to them, can you help us? But I think if you're working with someone, they're not going to help you or cut you a break or something like that. You might
but then her, she's stuck with the signing of a vet that won't help her out.
But that's what I'm saying. I would then
we're kind of in the north country of Syracuse and Central Florida. It's lucky to even get a vet.
What about the teaching colleges?
Cornell has never been user-friendly at all.
Well, thank you all. Stacy, would you like to do the video?
Oh, yeah, I can show you guys the video. So you already know, and we're running out of time, so I don't want to take a lot of your time. So most of the organizations here are accredited. We have some that are not in New York that haven't been accredited yet, but very close, so hopefully they'll be this year too. This is just a video we showed at the roundtable. We were lucky to be speaking at the roundtable about aftercare on behalf of all the groups here, and the other ones across North America. And this is sort of why it's important to be accredited. It's important And, you know, I was in all of your positions raising money for horses and thinking, we just got to get money to the groups and get money to the horses. And the accreditation part has really been a fundamental part. It's giving all of you more of a presence without other donations, other organizations, other representation for you to get funds. So this is a very short video that we put together about accreditation and why we feel and why you feel that it's important. So you can play it.
A lot of us have had a really good time of telling people, look at what these horses have already done. They've been around tractors, they've been around dogs, they've been around crowds, they've been around cheering. You know, these horses already have so many experiences in life that they can transition, most of them, pretty easily.
People are really looking for thoroughbreds as a sport horse now. Some horses are made for jumping, some are made for eventing, some are made for dressage, and some are for polo, and we find out exactly what a horse is going to be good for.
These horses are so trainable, and they just need a little time to adapt and somebody who understands their language. And then when you give them a slightly new opportunity to learn a new vocabulary, you're not going to get a more articulate breed, period. And you're not going to find one with more heart.
Equine aftercare, I personally feel, has really probably evolved in the last 10 years. You know, 10 years ago, somebody would just be like, oh, my trainer took care of it. And now I feel that the majority of people can say, my horse went to New Vocations, it went to Rerun, it went to Canter. And all of those organizations are TAA accredited.
The first thing that TA does for any organization is that it gives it credibility.
Since the inception of Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance, we've gone from having about 10 horses a day to carrying about 20 on our book.
We are held to a certain standard of care for our horses, for our facilities, for the education that we provide, you know, both racehorse trainers who are retiring horses and adopters.
I think the TA is the best thing to happen to not just aftercare, but horse racing in years. And, you know, you can look at any blade of grass here and you'll know that the TA has had some effect on it. For me, the sign that the TAA accredited us is the same as the Good Housekeeping sign of the Better Business Bureau.
If you are a donor or if you are a prospective adopter, you look on the TAA's roster and you look at the organizations who have met the very stringent demands of the TAA's application. And they're tough and they're hard and they should be.
With aftercare now being on everyone's radar, we've had a lot more applications for adoption. We've moved more horses in the past year since being a part of the TAA than we've ever been able to find a home for before.
They really united all kinds of elements of horse racing, from the trainers and the jockeys to the auction houses to the owners and the breeders. They've all created one place where all these people can come together to help all these horses and to help the sport in general, and I think that might be their major accomplishment.
So there you go. That's who we are. Most of you know who we are. And I know we're really tight on time, so we don't need to go through the whole thing. But if you have any questions, especially Commissioner, I'd love to hear from you. We'd love to talk. We know Rick sits on our board, and this Rick has been a big help with doing both our inspections and advice for us. And we have a big advisory board, lots of partners. Our magazine is here. At this point, it's not about me. I think that the industry has really come together, and I have spoke with standardbred people, not just Anna Ford's family, but also Anna sent some people to talk about our plan. We've talked on a global scale to Japan. We've been to Europe and England and talked with Australia and all kinds of different groups. All over the world, this is a serious issue for people to talk about, and we could discuss ad nauseum all our individual problems and things that change and what variable, what happens. But at the end of the day, I really think that these sort of programs that you have in New York are good. It's strong. It's got a great foundation because of Andy and Rick and your horsemen's group here. And if we can be of any help and assistance, we'd like to.
We could probably use a little company in our monthly meetings, which I'm sure we're going to have on a monthly basis now.
Anytime. Yep.
Any other comments? I want to thank you all for taking time from your busy schedule to join us today in Saratoga. The Commission proverbial doors are always open. Just ask Jack Felton. Please let us know if you have any additional ideas, questions, or concerns. New York State is committed to finding safe homes for these horses and have done so much for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you.